What was I to do to celebrate turning 27 but play Star Wars Episode 1 Racer, a game I had on the N64 for a while but also conveniently had on my PS4 for a number of years since I got my PS4? I ended up purchasing the limited edition Darth Vader version. Why the hell not? It was 2015 and they sold this version for the same price as the normal PS4, though in hindsight I almost wish I got the normal PS4 since this thing was super susceptible to scratching and honestly didn't look at all cool, to be honest. Whatever though, I got this game ported up to the system and finally, almost 10 years later, I finally got around to playing the thing for more than a few laps. Anyhow, let's get into it. Star Wars Episode 1 Racer came out at a time when Star Wars was seeing numerous games yearly. It was the age of the prequel films and George Lucas was renting out Star Wars to anyone who would pay him. Pod racing became a hot part of the first film in the prequel trilogy, Star Wars Episode 1 The Phantom Menace, becoming perhaps the most marketable thing for kids of that era of Star Wars. This game was developed by LucasArts and put out in May of 1999 after about 2 years of development. The game designed to be a tie-in to the then brand new Phantom Menace film. The game was developed pretty much blind to what pod racing would look like in the film. Starting in 1997, the team had very little to go off besides a handful of concept clips to make a physics engine on, adding the look and feel to match the film later on as the film progressed. The game was set to be called Episode 1 Pod Racer, but due to an ongoing legal trademark dispute, Lucasfilm feared putting Pod Racer in the title, instead just calling it Racer. But notably, it is a game comprised 100% of pod racing and locales across the Star Wars universe. Eventually the game would be dropped as a flagpole tie-in to the film. Jake Lloyd came back to voice Anakin and also toured the game a bit at E3 1999. Online play was planned and cut. The game had ports to Windows, Mac, Sega Dreamcast, N64, with a downgraded version to Game Boy Color upon its release. Later on, it would be bumped up to the Switch, Xbox One, PS4, also being playable on those console successors through backwards compatibility by THQ Nordic and later by Aspyr Games once they largely held the rights to Star Wars video games as Vault after Disney acquired Lucasfilm and as a result LucasArts, now known as Lucasfilm Games since 2021. The game's general storyline is that Saboba is the best pod racer of all time and you need to race him and other characters to win various cups, which include the cleverly named Amateur Circuit, Semi-Pro Circuit, Galactic Circuit, and Invitational Circuit, racing on Tatooine, Ando Prime, Aquilus, Barunda, Malastar, Mongaza, Ovo 4, and Ord Ibana. This game has 23 playable characters, each with unique and customizable pod racers, including the base roster, which includes Anakin Skywalker, Dud Bolt, Ebe and Kot, Elon Mask, Gasgano, and my personal favorite, the King, Odie Mandrell, though you can quickly expand the roster even further with Aldar Beto, Bumpy, Ben Quadaneros, Bulls Roar, Bozy Bartana, Bullseye, Clegg Holdfast, Fud Sang, Mars Guo, Mohawk, Neva Key, Rats Tyrell, Slide Paramita, Team Tomo, Pagalis, Toy Damper, Juan Sanage, and Saboba himself, with 2 cheat codes unlocking secret characters Sayunga and Jin Riso. For a minute there, I considered adding my Star Wars OC character, Darius Pringle, to the list just to see if you were paying attention, but I figured it'd be no use since all of these characters sound just as made up as Darius Pringle anyways. I honestly don't know what George was smoking when he made up these names. Anyhow, we ended up by and large using Odie Mandrell since his pod racer seemed pretty well rounded and Odie Mandrell is my goat. This game is a racing game, think F-Zero, but more boring. Part of the problem is that the game is very straightforward. Accelerate a lot, try to drift corners, slow down when needed, and boost occasionally, but by and large the gameplay is simply keep your player on the track and edge out the other guys. There are environments you can crash into, damageable objects. Then, as you beat races, you earn new parts for your pod racer to upgrade and improve in your races. The early game is, to put it bluntly, ungodly easy. It isn't until the final 2 cups, the Galactic Circuit and the Invitational, that you may get a bit of sweat on your brow. This game is 100% skill-based, which in a way is cool, but when CPU players aren't very skillful and the gameplay loop is easy as hell, it doesn't exactly bode well for the game's length. And unlike Mario Kart, which is an endlessly fun party game, the game kind of loses its gusto after a bit, since it really lacks the challenge and kind of lacks the party game aspects that the items and interesting kart varieties add to Mario's racing equivalent. Now, in fairness, you really feel the speed of this game, and at least for a time, blasting around the Bunta Eve Classic or Mongaza's hellish speedways are kind of unique. On that note, it would be horribly simple for Lucasfilm to have made a series of race courses around Tatooine, which are effectively the same textures moved to different map shapes. And I think, in part, since this game was made in-house and George Lucas is a smart businessman, he knew kids would eat up the pod racing in Episode 1, and as a result, tie-in toys and games came out, and often to a pretty solid quality. They knew this would probably sell, so they didn't make it total shovelware. The game has 25 unique courses, each featuring a different boss character to race, consisting of the unlockable characters, and each planet has a unique feel to it. Tatooine has the training course and the Bunta Eve itself, recreating moments from the film in a cohesive track. Mongaza has some hellish lava maps, as I said. Ando Prime has some snowy mountain terrains. Aquarius is a pseudo-dock track on a water planet. Malastar is a planet with rivers, mountains, with this kind of spooky dark aura to it. Ovo has a race around a reactor, being this kind of alien warehouse of sorts. Ordibana has some rusted beatdown urban industrial sky cities. Barunda has a beach level and a forest level. Are these locations all that unique for a racing game? No, not really, but it is nice that they aren't just making us do loops around the desert, so I can live with that for some amount of aesthetic variety. Graphically, this game looks pretty ahead of its time on the PS4 port and runs as smooth as butter considering everything. It looks really nice for its age and brings me a load of nostalgia for that age of games when things were starting to come together and look realistic, but far from the hyper-realism of today. The game is also just really accurate to pod racing in the film. You can sustain damage and kind of have to scramble, spin out, crash into objects and other racers, and it feels like a shockingly close pod racing simulator. And the game on its modern ports feels pretty good, and what I played from the N64 kart, which mind you I've played like 4 tracks on total, also played pretty good, if you want to play on some original hardware rather than the more modern ports. Also, if you get damaged too much, you'll need to buy new parts, and the game has a pretty intuitive economy system that allows you to buy and trade with junk dealers to improve your pod racer or fix things that were broken. There are a few cutscenes in the game, which look a little less generous today than the game itself in motion, but it works fine enough, and this game came out in 1999, so we can't expect the world from them in 2026. Musically, this game pulls its assets from The Phantom Menace, which was kind of an advantage of making a film tie-in game in-house for the studio that made the game and the film. And the music in the Star Wars prequels is some of the best stuff in the prequels, and perhaps the best music in the entire Star Wars series, if I'm being honest. The biggest problem with this game is its lack of playtime. It's so ungodly easy. There are upgrades that kinda help, and hazards that kinda threaten you, but you can really just bury the lead on opponents, and if there is rubber banding in this game, you absolutely will not know, because if you get really far past another racer, they're gone, you lost them, and there's no longer a threat. Perhaps characters could have had rechargeable gimmicks, like remember how Saboba would just sabotage people's shit and murder them in the movie? I don't know, something like that could be kind of fun. Maybe tosses wrenches at people and it screws up their pod racer for a second. Though instead what we got is this kind of earnest simulator, and I don't know what I want. I think this game is kind of fun. Like picking it up and doing a couple races and popping on a different game right after, kind of fun though, not sit down and play it for 3 hours. I imagine if I bought this game in 1999, or hell, even rented it at full price, then crushed every opponent first try and beat every cup in like 2 hours, I may have felt a little cheated. I feel I can reflect positively on it for the most part today, simply because I got it as one game out of several in a bundle that came with my PS4, which I bought for standard retail price for the PS4 at the time. It was ostensibly a freebie. If I paid $50 for this back in the day, I may have been a bit annoyed by the lack of content and difficulty. The game in its day came out to middle-of-the-road reviews. People didn't love it, people didn't hate it. Most people calling it pretty unremarkable outside of the Star Wars license. One critic even questioning if his review was in part fairly positive due to the Star Wars influence and the massive cultural event that The Phantom Menace was at the time, and the feeling of the franchise returning to the mainstream in such a bombastic and major manner, kind of raising everything up with the hype. It's kind of funny to think about the Phantom Menace hype train influencing people, since I myself bought this weird Darth Vader PS4 in the lead up to Star Wars The Force Awakens, when, once again, Star Wars shit was popping up everywhere, and a lot of us hoped it would be some amazing top-of-the-line return to form. Anyhow, as for the Star Wars fans watching this who watch my other Star Wars-based videos, I'm going to deem this game non-canon. I've seen people try to rationalize this, but it simply isn't possible. The Jedi allowed Anakin to tour his pod racer across the pod racing galactic tournaments right before he started his Jedi training or something. Though I suppose you could still ass-pull that Anakin's inclusion is non-canon, but everything else was. Me, I'm not gonna bother trying to cherry-pick so it fits into canon. Also, if you do like Star Wars and you haven't seen my Star Wars playlist with tons of Star Wars content, you should check that out. It'll be on the end screen right here, and I review video games, movies, comics, novels. I've literally done everything, so check it out.